In the year 2023, I began noticing a sort of memeification of tropes. None of these words are in the Bible, etc., etc. Yeah, I know. But when I say that, I mean that I notice certain fictional concepts and plot devices making the rounds more and more, in storied rhetoric like tweets and Tumblr posts, high literature. You get a lot of standard fanfiction tropes bumping around pop culture this way. Enemies to lovers, fake dating, the stuff that clogs the shelves of my local bookstore when I'm just trying to find my girl failure novels. Come on! But sometimes it gets more esoteric, and I noticed quite a few in the fiction zeitgeist this year. Came back wrong was a big one. People love a good came back wrong. That's when a character is brought back from some terrible fate, only to not quite be the person they were before, often to horrific ends. Eating people, that one was pretty big. Big year for eating people, non-sexually, in fiction. Thank you, Yellow Jackets. There was one, however, that seemed to fittingly keep the internet in a vice grip no matter how many days went by, and that was the time loop. Yes, all year long it seemed like I was reading memes about time loops, writing prompts about time loops, tweets about time loops, so much so that I started to feel as if I was, repeating it a lot. I don't know what you'd call that. But what even is it? As a plot device, the time loop is more or less when a character is experiencing the same time period over and over again and cannot seem to escape. They usually don't want to be there, but this isn't always the case. This time period could be a day, an hour, a month, or more, as long as it's a set time frame that repeats a lot. Some popular examples are Groundhog Day, where Bill Murray repeats the titular holiday, the River Song plot of Doctor Who, where the TARDIS explodes, and the infamous Endless 8 storyline adapted into the Haruhi Suzumiya anime, where the show spends 8 episodes repeating the same day of the cast's summer vacation, with minor variations between each episode. Performance art, camp, something, I don't know, I didn't waste my time watching it. Time loops are a pretty malleable concept. Like any particularly good fiction trope, they can be used to suit all sorts of genres, tones, and styles. Look at the examples I threw at you just a second ago. Groundhog Day is a comedy. Doctor Who is a science fiction serial with weird, funny monsters, but also apocalyptic consequences to a lot of its plots. Haruhi is a wacky anime with a lot of different tones based on light novels. The time loop is more often than not a puzzle, be it practical or moral. Its existence inherently requires it to be solved for the characters to move on, and it's often solved by doing the right action to fix it. In the Endless 8, it's fixed by the characters doing their summer homework. There's an entire subset of time loop stories about characters, usually children, purposefully wanting Christmas to be every single day because of how fun it is, only to learn that the fun of something like that in part comes from the fact that they only celebrate it once a year, making it special in the first place. Maybe the people who make RuPaul's Drag Race need to be stuck in a time loop, I don't know, just saying. And like most good genre tropes, it lends itself easily to emotional evocativeness. You think a sad story is sad as is? Well, what about when that sad story happens over and over again? What about that sad story happening over and over again with the characters fully aware of it, trying to stop the inevitable and failing? The magical girl anime Madoka Magica chiefly revolves around the character Homura, resetting time by several months over and over in an effort to save the character Madoka from being destroyed by her magical girl contract. It never seems to work, and she unravels a little more every time because of it. Trauma is bad enough once, but over and over, feeling as if you could undo it all if you just got it right, and not being able to? Oof. But that's the other layer of time loops. Sometimes, no matter how many chances you get, you can't undo something terrible, or you just can't stop terrible things from happening. This lays the groundwork for another moral: acceptance. Much of time travel fiction concerns itself with how much or how little we can change our reality. A lot of time loop stories use the fixing of the loop itself as a means to convey a moral. But what if the moral itself is that some things are just out of our hands? In one of my favorite graphic novels, Brian Lee O'Malley's Seconds, an enterprising young restaurateur named Katie uses magic mushrooms, no, not those kinds, to reset time and do over her many mistakes, such as having an affair with one of her chefs and letting it distract her to the point where she lets one of her employees get severely injured. She ends up getting greedy, using the do-overs to not only fix her mistakes, but improve her life and better pursue her dreams, no matter how petty or grandiose. And in the end, it only makes her life worse than it was before. The time loop can be a means of reminding us we need to fix things. It can also be a means of telling us we're not meant to be meddling sometimes. Over all of this, I kept coming back to a big question. Why did time loops capture our collective imagination so thoroughly, and why now? I don't think there's one answer that'll ring true for every single person who participated in this discussion, but I do think there's a cerebral nature to this particular trope that triggers something in people, and the response it triggers can vary widely. We are nearly 4 years past the start of the COVID pandemic. In those years, people have lost a lot: time, health, loved ones. A myriad of socio-political issues and the pattern of everyday personal problems alike have been causing despair and regret on a pretty big scale. Whether or not they're proven true in data, problems like economic struggles, personal strife, and poor health outcomes have seemed to dominate a lot of our culture. And a recurring theme I've noticed in discussions of this is helplessness. We feel helpless in the face of institutional failure, helpless in the face of the way that the universe seems to hand out fortune and misfortune alike undiscerningly, helpless in the face of the passage of time itself. Through all of this, a lot of people probably wouldn't mind a second chance, an opportunity to do things differently. Some of us are craving the trappings of a time loop, and still some of us feel like we're in one. See, time loops are a distinctly science fiction construct. There's currently no way to manipulate the passage of time or our presence in it, as far as we know. But that doesn't mean time loops can't exist in another sense. A rut is a kind of time loop. A series of failed social connections that all seem to end the same way is a kind of time loop. Trying to avoid a mistake that you've made before and managing to make it anyway is a time loop. A severe bout of symptoms from a mental illness, a lockdown in a pandemic, a job you hate, a toxic relationship, debt. We may not be able to physically move through time and space, but we can feel as if the days are the same even as the number on the calendar continues to change. And that can be even scarier than supernatural repetition. In the real world, you don't get to keep all the hours you lost in the loop. When you fix the problem and the repetition is over. If you spend your teenage years with an abusive partner, you don't get those precious years of your youth back. If you spend your early 20s too depressed to get out of bed, you don't get what some people call your peak years back, even if you manage to get your mental health under control. You can be in a time loop in the real world for sure, but you don't get to reset the timeline. But if there's one thing time loop stories do tell us, it's that they can be fixed. And maybe you won't get that time you lost back, but maybe you'll gain the time that the loop would have taken from you if you hadn't fixed it at all. One must imagine Sisyphus happy, especially if, whether he wasted time pushing the rock or not, he gets to stop pushing at all. You may not salvage what's behind you, but you can salvage what's ahead. Like most great art, time loop stories resonate in part because they give us catharsis, and the ways it's given can take just as many forms as the art the framework is translated into. We can relate to the feeling of being stuck, to the feeling of wanting to get unstuck, and to the hopelessness that comes with not getting the outcome you wanted, sometimes repeatedly. We can see hope to break out of our own repeating days when the characters do crack the code and escape. We can learn to let go, to recognize our cycles, and to keep fighting for our own return to what feels like real linear time. That's a lot of reality for something we can't even do. So, sure, lots of genre tropes had their time in the sun in 2023, but as the year winds down, I'm gonna dedicate my champagne to the time loop. The realest thing to never happen. In the year 2023, I began noticing a sort of